Hello and welcome back to the live stream. Thank you for joining me. I hope you're doing well today. It's time for the first live stream since moving house. And wow is moving house a hell of a lot of pain. Incredible amounts of stress and tedium and details to keep track of, and all sorts of really annoying nonsense. I mean, I've moved house a fair few times, but the last few times have all been when I was much younger. I have in fact lived in the previous house for over a decade, so I'd really underestimated. I mean, I'd been out in between for university and such, but moving one person and like half of the belongings from one room, very much a smaller process than moving an entire household. It has been so stressful. Every time you think you've got everything sorted, you've got all the little bits squared away and all the little bits and pieces packed, you find out actually, hey, hang on, no, there was one other thing hiding behind this box or in this one cupboard somewhere that you didn't check, or under the stairs or up in the attic, and it's all got to get moved over, and then all the furniture, and oh my god, it never ever stops. And then moving day happens and you're exhausted at the end of the day, and then you go, okay, well, time to go unpack the essentials because, you know, we gotta have dinner and stuff in this new house today. So now you're looking through boxes and you're trying to remember what got put where, and you've got your box that's labeled kitchen stuff, but not everything fit inside it, so you just slipped a little piece into another box somewhere else, and now you've got to track it down and dig it out. Oh my god. I'm so glad to be done with it. Not fully done with it yet, if I'm being quite honest. There's still a couple boxes standing in my room, but most of the stuff has been put away, most of it's sorted. Enough that I can get back to streaming. We're doing a rare weekend stream. I normally don't stream on the weekends, I keep those for myself, but since I was simply too busy during the week and I really wanted to do a live stream, I decided, you know what, I'm doing it for fun anyway. Normally, like, my idea was, okay, I want to do this for fun, but you should be sensible, keep time for other hobbies and stuff like that, keep time for yourself to just kind of socially recharge, relax on the weekends. But I thought, nah, this is fun, and this is what I need to relax today, not anything else. So here I am live streaming, and I'm glad to be back. Thankfully, everything seems to be working. I did have to, I completely forgot I had to go sort out stuff with my IP address on VCFace to get the VTuber model working, so I was quickly doing that in the starting soon screen, but it seems to have gone without any issues. A little bit jittery here and there. I am now currently on the Wi-Fi. I was previously plugged into the router with an Ethernet cable, but that was kind of, we had little clips on the walls to run that along the staircase down to the router. Haven't done that in this house, not sure if I'm going to. I'm just kind of testing things out, seeing if the internet holds up and handles a live stream. And so far it seems fine. Our internet is very, very good. There's a new service that moved into this area like 2 years ago or so, who offer way better internet, really, really good. I'm getting like 600 up and down, which is fantastic. So it seems to be pretty stable. Gonna try it out for a stream, see how it goes, but I don't expect any issues beyond having to quickly scramble and remember which IP address do I need to get from where to put into what, and what do I need to set the ports to? Do I need to set up permissions for ports on VSeeFace? Thankfully I didn't. That's something I haven't done in a long time. I remember back as a kid wanting to play Minecraft with my friends and setting up our own, like hosting a server and setting that up, and having to set up permissions for what was the program called? There was some program you ran that handled Minecraft servers for you, and you had to set up specific ports and stuff in order to send and receive data from the server so that other people could actually join. I'm surprised that like 11-year-old me managed to figure that stuff out, but we did, and we enjoyed playing a little Minecraft game back when it was in like alpha or something. I got into Minecraft really early, and it's remained one of my favorite games since then. Yeah, that's all sorted. Anything else I want to talk about news-wise before getting into a little bit of fun writing and world building? I don't think so. Mostly it's just been the stress of a move. Haven't really had much time for anything else besides that. I've barely played a video game or anything recently. I have been keeping up with the news on EU5 and all the cool features when that finally releases. Also CK3, the DLC that's coming out like end of this year, the All Under Heaven DLC. I'm pretty excited for that. New DLC announced just the other day for RimWorld. That's also pretty interesting. Gonna absolutely destroy my mod list because I'm running mods but I haven't updated in like a year plus because the game hasn't changed, so they still work. And now we're gonna get a new DLC, which means everything is going to break. Supposedly they've made some improvements on the startup time. I think they were saying they changed the loading time from like 16 seconds to 4 seconds on their machines. I'm hoping that some of that translates to mod list loading times, because I run a couple hundred mods on RimWorld, and you gotta walk away for like half an hour, go watch an episode of anime or something while you're waiting for that program to open. It's ridiculous. And other game-wise, I own Breath of the Wild, Legend of Zelda on this Switch, but only played like a tiny bit of it. Might get back into that, because I recently started watching Crow on YouTube. Makes some very funny videos, and he does lots of speedrun stuff in like Pokemon games and like Pokemon Nuzlocke, and he does speedruns in Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom. So just recently I watched his playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom, and god, what an absolutely stunningly beautiful game that is. I was crying earlier watching the ending of that game on his video. Really fantastic. Might need to get that once I finish playing Breath of the Wild when I get around to it. I saw the Switch 2 also released. That completely passed me by. I did not even know that we had a release date. I knew the Switch 2 had been announced at some point, but that it was just suddenly coming out, that caught me off guard. Just popped completely out of nowhere, like, oh, the Switch 2 is here, people are making videos about some crappy $10 tech demo that they released with it, or something ridiculous like that. Haven't seen much of it. I don't know how good the new console is, or how much backwards compatibility they have. Nintendo has been pretty good in the past as far as backwards compatibility was concerned, right? Like, you could play older DS games on the newer DS. The Game Boy Advance had a slot for... not the Game Boy Advanced? No, the the DS had a slot for Game Boy games, didn't it? Like at the bottom, which was fantastic and ridiculous. So I'm hoping that there's some compatibility for Switch games on the Switch too. Of course, that won't be relevant for me for a good while yet. the Switch I have was something I saved up for, and the Switch 2 is like what, 400 something pounds? Not gonna be buying one of those. That's ridiculous. Can't afford that. But all things get old, and even if Nintendo never lowers its prices, the secondary market does get cheaper over time. For now though, I think that is plenty of rambling. We're already 20 minutes in. So why don't I switch over to what the stuff we'll be doing today. We're going to be continuing with the Cult Urban Fantasy City that I was building. I've got that here in Incarnate, as you know, I made a little mock-up map to get an idea of roughly how this is laid out, and then we done a little bit of, after the first stream, of thinking about what kind of stuff should go into this kind of setting. We then had a second stream where we went through and created a handful of different cults and organizations that might fit in to this kind of setting. And I think we've got a good selection here. What I did go and do was port all of that over to back. I ported all of that over to Obsidian Notes because I just kind of Google Docs is nice for streaming, for writing stuff quickly, but it's not great for organization. You can kind of do stuff with headings and subheadings if you want to split stuff up, but it's not great. And I enjoy the layout for Obsidian Notes. I like having the two tabs if you want to have, you know, multiple things open next to each other. I especially enjoy this thing, the node tree graph view kind of thing that you can color coordinate. So what I've put into here so far is all of the stuff that we had written before. Some of them we hadn't actually put any details in yet for, but yeah, all of the notes on the different organizations. And then I put in a couple more. I wrote a little bit about Twins Cross the town itself, just a little summary, and put in some empty notes about different sections of the city. And I wrote this off. This was meant to be a quick little summary, because I had the East and West Bay Club in here, and had the little, really inconvenient trying to switch between different windows on here, and had a little thing here about a potential reconciliation and a law that these are two successors to the original Twin Bay Club. So I went and wrote a little bit of lore, and it was supposed to be just a quick summary of, hey, there used to be a Twin Bay Club, then it fragmented, and now we have the East and West Bay Club, who both call themselves the Twin Bay Club, but aren't really. Instead, I ended up writing this 4-paragraph long thing, going about some of the history and the circumstances and the details that led to this organization fracturing. I did decide over the course of this that rather than one club kind of Roman Empire style splitting into the East and West, I wanted it to have fractured into a bunch of smaller ones, and then have those splinters mostly either fail or end up getting absorbed into one of the two main successors. I feel like that just kind of fit the story a bit better in terms of how each of these organizations is trying to claim legitimacy as being the successor to the original, and the kind of more small-scale personal nature of this being a cult of wizards and not a government that stretches across the entire Mediterranean. Slightly different circumstances that necessitate slightly different details. Plus, the Roman Empire didn't like splinter into two; it was deliberately divided into two, again different. Which brings us to today, where we're just gonna kind of keep filling some stuff out. I'm not sure yet on exactly what. We might write about some people. I do have a category for that. Maybe some key figures in a few of these. We could expand upon the lore for each organization now that we've got them in separate notes and all properly organized. Possibly tie in some locations that each rules, or write some about, you know, the various parts of the city. I felt like District and Quarter and New and Old City were better names for this. I originally started off with the Old City being called that just kind of as a matter of course. It seemed a very clearly fitting name. But on the Incarnate map I had called the new stuff the New Build, which is technically correct in terms of description, but didn't really sound good in terms of what people might actually refer to the area if you're living in the city. So Old City, New City, then the Industrial Quarter, which sounds a little bit more like dividing a city into districts. That's like an organizational government level thing, that's administrative. In terms of actual what people in the city refer to places as, places just have a name, they aren't, and we will have different neighborhoods that are called different things, but broadly, like you might have the east or west side of the city, we've got Old City, New City, we've got the Industrial Quarter, and the Abandoned District. I did write in here, like this is the kind of length that I was originally going for with this. I still don't know how I ended up with 4 paragraphs instead of a short summary. I should probably read through those actually, since I wrote them off stream. Let me go through these quickly. Go through this one, and then I think start by writing in some details about the different sections of the city. So first, the Twin Bay Club, which is an old establishment, or was an old establishment dating back to the official founding of Twins Cross. The Twin Bay Club used to be a hegemon of magical dealings within the city, and here you can see that I've been reading CK3 Death Diaries because I'm talking about hegemons, ripping that term right out of there. Formed out of the most powerful and influential members of the growing community, both magical and otherwise. The club served to strengthen the city and facilitate cooperation between groups that would not deal with each other yet couldn't afford to stay out of city politics. So what I'm imagining is that as Twins Cross grew from, you know, whatever initial settlements had been there into an actual town, like a village, town, then city, there will have been various cults, like those over off in the woods, and you know, maybe some related to the sea, to the river, those coming in new who were living in the city, that weren't particularly interested in each other or actively disliked each other, but couldn't afford to completely stay out of local politics because the growing city and its influence were just too important. They had to be dealt with in some manner. So the Twin Bay Club facilitated that by being something of a new, like the Twin Bay Club kind of fulfilled the role that in modern Twins Cross is fulfilled by the University Library Committee, of being an overseer, a neutral ground, a third party that others can come to and deal with when they're not willing to deal with each other. However, over time, the club grew more elitist in its membership and selfish in its goals. Development and urbanization pushed out cults drawing power from nature, while smaller groups in the city couldn't compete in terms of money and resources. So centralization and mergers and acquisitions in a sort of business sense meant that the unified, growing administration of a Twin Bay Club was able to outpace its competitors. The arrival of the modern day changed all of that, however. Old methods of maintaining power proved insufficient as the population grew too large for the club's membership to personally control. When you've got a town/city of a couple tens of thousands of people, then, you can, with enough members in government controlling things, you can kind of exert influence and keep an eye on enough people individually to weed out anyone who's growing magical influence, right? Like between local town meetings and neighborhood watches or whatever, stuff like that, you will sooner or later have some of your members, be it the ones in charge or the ones employed, run into everyone in the city and check whether anyone's doing magic and how strong they are and stuff like that. As the city grew and grew to become hundreds of thousands of people, there's just too many. You no longer can keep up and personally interact with everyone, so they started to lose their overarching control. New mage groups established themselves and were able to find enough members to present significant threats. Meanwhile, the number of minor cults and independent practitioners grew so large that a serious alliance between enough of them might have overrun the club entirely. Yeah, as I said, there's just too much of them to keep under control and keep everyone individually under their thumbs, and they were too slow to adapt to new methods of maintaining their power. Some of the stuff that the East and West Bay Club do in a modern day could have kept the Twin Bay Club in charge and in one piece if they'd adopted it earlier, but they simply struggled to. The culmination of these rapidly changing circumstances was the ultimate The culmination of these rapidly changing circumstances was the ultimate schism of the club. Differences of ideology, vision for the future, and family alliances fragmented them into a number of successors. Most of these proved short-lived without the unified hegemony they had relied on for so long. So basically, if all the ideas everyone had weren't working for the large, powerful, centralized organization, they certainly weren't going to work for all of the splinters that formed afterwards. In the present day, only 2 of the over a dozen splinters remain, the rest having been reabsorbed or disbanded. I'm imagining various families realizing that actually they can't keep this up on their own and coming back into the fold, or various groups like business groups and new ventures failing, and eventually the people just going their separate ways. Some of them becoming independent, some joining other organizations, and some going back to East and West Bay Club. While each of them claims to be the Twin Bay Club, the rest of the city refers to them as the East Bay Club and the West Bay Club. And then we've got these summaries from the previous live stream of what the East and West Bay Club are. So that's what I put down for that, and then what I wrote for Twins Cross off stream. The city of Twins Cross sits at the mouth of the rivers Fred and Yarn. I figured naming natural features is in some ways so much more difficult than naming people and places and organizations. Like, organizations are named, generally speaking, after the things that they do, and it's really easy to draw associations and come up with relevant words and stuff, or think about just how real organizations name themselves and do something like that. People, you just use actual names. If you're not doing a fantasy language or whatever, maybe you pick names with meaning. Again, not too difficult. Places, I love naming places. Naming Twins Cross, coming up with a name for that was very fun. Natural features are a pain to come up with names for, because they operate on a very similar style as place names, in being very, when you actually look into the meaning of the words, being very boring and descriptive. Lots of famous rivers or famous places like deserts and stuff around the world are just called river or desert or whatever in their original native language. The problem is that in order to do that with a fantasy world, you either rip a name from some old language in the real world. So for example, you can call a river Avon, the way that lots of rivers in the UK are, or you have to make up a fantasy language or a word for river in a theoretical fantasy language, even if you don't build the rest of it. And then you're making words up whole cloth, which, as someone who's tried to do a little bit of conlanging, so difficult. I find it really, really hard. And also, it's an easy trap to fall into, because while I think I'm pretty good about not getting World Builder's disease, Conlanger's disease gets me. Once I want to name something in a fictional language, and I come up with enough rules to come up with even just that one name, I now have a framework to build off, which makes it so tempting to start naming all tons of stuff in all sorts of different fantasy terms. And that's a dangerous rabbit hole to fall into. I try to avoid it. That being said, if you're not doing that, if you aren't naming your river but in some old language, like I think, besides the Avon, I think the Thames is some like ancient Greek or Latin word for water as well. I think the Nile is an ancient Egyptian word for the water. Lots of stuff like that. Then what do you call them? Because you can no longer use the same idea as naming places. Like Twins Cross is called Twins Cross because it's the twin crossings over the rivers. Very straightforward, but still sounds fantastic. But for natural formations, if you're not making up languages, do you just call your river River? Not great. You don't have to name it, technically. I could have just said City of Twins Cross sits at the mouth of two rivers and not bothered naming them, but I feel like they're way too core of a feature to the city and way too relevant for me to not name them. I'm not going to be, saying, oh, this place is here at the bay of the Western River. Like, maybe West River, East River would have also worked. Those would have been reasonable names to go with, not terrible. Like in Game of Thrones, the continents being named Westeros and Esteros. I know some people have criticized that, but honestly, I think those names are perfect. They're just the right level of, yeah, the continent are named West Continent and East Continent, but sounding fictional and fantasy enough to still be interesting. I think it's a perfect name. Let me just take a drink. But that kind of thing doesn't work for every situation. And here we have already got an East and West Bay and an East and West Bay club. Do I then want to have East and West River? It's a little too much. So these are what I came up with. I settled fairly quickly on calling one of the rivers the Thread, and my thinking was that some early explorer writing in their diary was feeling kind of poetic and described the river further upriver as like a thread laid across the landscape or running through the landscape, something like that. And then they followed the thread to the sea. And then it was like, okay, we followed this river, which we're calling the Thread, and we found another river right next to it. What do we call it? It's going to be something thread related. I was thinking about Spindle or Thimble or something like that. Eventually I went with the river Yarn. So that's how these two got named, the rivers Thread and Yarn, Thread and Out of Universe. In Universe, the explanation is that someone was feeling poetic, and then they went with this. Out of Universe, it's goddamn conlangs are a dangerous thing to touch, even with a 10-foot pole. So it's named after the twin crossings of the rivers are closest, which I would put on the map, which serve to connect the farming communities to the east of the logging camps in the west before the founding of the city proper. And that kind of ties into then the backstory for the Twin Bay Club and how that got itself established, where you would have had, I'm imagining that the initial settlements, the first ones that people build, would have been somewhere towards the east on the more open, flat farmland. Just small little hamlets of a few people who were farming the land. And then Later on, when they built for crossings over rivers, they will have started looking to the west and build logging camps along the forest edge to then bring that timber back over the rivers to where the people were living. Eventually, someone would have come along and went, actually, you know what, this is a pretty good location. The hills on the west bank, good resources, protected by the ocean and the rivers, very defensible. Why don't we just build over here where the woods are, instead of shipping all this stuff over to the other side of the rivers all the time? And that will explain why the old city part is on west. I can probably bring the map back up real quick for this part. Yeah, so like over here along the coast in this section will be where the old city part is, and then it kind of grew across the river and over to here. This is where the crossing would have been, and then over here would have been where all the farmland used to be before the industry was built. And here the woods where they were cutting the trees from. They probably started more along here, kind of, and then gradually, as the forest got cut back, expanded further and further north and west towards the forest. Until eventually it just kind of grew and encompassed everything. So in the modern day, Twins Cross has grown into a sizable city that sprawls beyond the banks of both rivers, broadly divided into the old city, the original parts to the west, the new city, all the bits in the middle and the south, then the industrial quarter to the east, and some people also consider the southeast as a separate abandoned district. I'll just think of it as part of the new city. This bit will be very relevant to the magic side of stuff, because most of the reason that I'm imagining this district is abandoned, is because the mages wanted so. And I'll need to put a note down at one point and actually work out the exact precise details of the magic system. But from what we discussed previously about how magic works through connections essentially, and that the more something is entwined with the world and the more noticeable to people a change to that thing would be, the harder it is to do magic on it, means that there is an active incentive for various magical groups to have abandoned buildings hidden away somewhere where no one ever goes, that they have greater control over because no one will notice if anything is done to those buildings. So there'll be some of those over to the west in the woods, like old warehouses and stuff where people used to store timber before it was shipped off, stuff like that. But then in the modern day they needed much more room, so they just kind of arranged for a part of the city to end up abandoned. And that's how we end up with an entire abandoned district. And of course, yes, the city is absolutely overrun with wizards, witches, warlocks, and cults. Because that's the whole point of this urban fantasy thing. As I'd mentioned before, I really love the idea of a busy and thriving urban fantasy. I know that it can seem really unrealistic, and there's a lot of justification that needs to be done to maintaining the veil if you want a masquerade style urban fantasy instead of just everything is magical and people know about it urban fantasy. But I think both have a really strong appeal, and I think the way that we'd come up with here for the mandate and how its magic works, and the fact that technically speaking you could just do magic wherever and it would be fine, but there is some creature that is essentially one and is in control of the world and is suppressing magic actively, gives us a really good explanation for why it's so hidden. Yeah, that combined with the connection part that will be spread across all forms of magic, and I think we have a very coherent system here. We have something that will hold up under scrutiny long term, and something that allows me to go absolutely wild in having as many random groups and organizations and individuals as I want. I mean, in a major city, we're talking like, on the low end, Twins Cross might have about 200,000 residents. On the high end, as many as double that, up to 400,000. and depending on how much work it is to draw out the map and get all the details down, I'm really leaning towards the upper end of that. But if we stick to 200,000, let's say that a tiny fraction of that population practices and has access to magic. It could be as few as 1,000 people. If the organizations have like 40 members for the very biggest ones, 40 active practitioners of magic for the very biggest organizations, then 1,000 individuals still means that we can have tons of them without the city feeling crowded. There can be plenty of space for everyone to go and do all of their nonsense without getting in each other's way. That's something that's discussed a lot in the space of World of Darkness when people want to do cross-splat games for that tabletop RPG, because it starts to... that game can, depending on what numbers you look at, start to feel a little crowded. I think they've given different statistics in different books in different eras, and some of them do kind of make you go, hang on. With these kind of percentages of the populations, for one splat, sure. For all of them, hang on, that means that like half the city is magical. That doesn't quite work out. But with the scale that we're working on, we can have a tiny fraction be magical and it'd still be fine. I mean, 1,000 people, that's what, 0.5% of 200,000? That seems reasonable. 0.5% of people have access to magic? Yeah? Not even 1 in 100? 1 in 200? So, to put that kind of into some perspective, 1 in 200 means that if you go to work in the morning on a bus and come back from work on another bus, one of those trips there'll have been a mage sitting on that bus. That seems okay. That seems not unreasonable. Yeah, I think it's a good number. Let me just take another sip of my drink real quick. This is the same problem that I inflict on myself every single time, where I get busy, I don't stream for a week, then I come back, and it immediately makes my throat hurt talking this much uninterrupted. I mean, I can talk a lot, and I do, but when you're having a conversation with people, there's a lot of pause and back and forth and stuff like that, whereas when it's me on stream just yapping, it really strains the throat. And I know that if I stick to it more regularly, it only takes like a couple streams to build up a tolerance, but when I come back after like 2 weeks away, oh, it's strenuous. I might need to make a little bit of an active effort for the rest of this stream, where possible. Talk a little bit more slowly and quietly and relaxed about it all. So for now, a few things that stand out to me. We'll want to look into filling some of these empty bits out. Excuse me, a little bit we want. And we want to choose an actual name for this organization. The Mandate. And I think Church is the obvious one, because no matter the connotations or intentions of the creature that they're worshipping, these people aren't doing this because the Mandate rewards them, because it doesn't. They aren't doing this because they're getting something out of it personally, because again, they're not, and the more the Mandate succeeds, the less magic there is, so they're not gaining here. These people are doing this because they've looked at the world and they believe that the Mandate is right, and how it wants the world to be is right, and they are like, it's an ideological thing for them. So I think Church of the Mandate is probably the most appropriate. Keepers of a Mandate also just sounds really good though. maybe we just maybe we just keep that there as a little note and keep Church of Her Mandate as the official name just for the time being. Going back then to the physical places, some of the information for the old and new city I've kind of already included in other places. There aren't really more details I need to get down for that right now. What about the industrial quarter? The second largest section of the city. The old city is the smallest, the new city sprawls across kind of the middle of that area, it is the biggest, and then the industrial quarter is big, but not as big. The second largest section of the city, taking up eastern region. The industrial quarter. What's important to note about this? How old it is? What kind of industry is in there? I want a lot of concrete and factories and places to get lost and hide in, because that's good for this kind of urban fantasy stuff. It probably doesn't start right by the edge of the river. The industrial quarter doesn't begin at the edge of the river. The old water wheel. What industry that used to take that area has been converted housing. Beyond it stretches a vast of steel and concrete factories, warehouses, cover the land from the river to the city's edge. The areas past that lies the merging of industry, nature, in the form of did I already use vast? Yeah, vast life in the form of any fields and farms that Port Winds Cross. Okay. Yeah, so the area it currently sits on is what would have been where all the farming was initially, until the city grew and grew and kind of pushed that stuff out, and the farms went further and further east, with more and more land cleared and developed. And now this is all factories and warehouses and industrial area. It probably goes north up to the coastline. The coastline will have been developed, but there does need to be docks. So yeah, maybe in that bit that kind of juts out. To the north, the old factories and houses were torn down to give industry access to the river and sea. To give industry access to the river and sea for shipping. I know I sometimes almost half-jokingly critique, like, it's not a real criticism, but I do find it funny every now and then talking about the trend in world building with a huge focus on realism and detail and the amount of effort people go to with plate tectonics and weather patterns and geology and stuff like that. But I gotta admit, I have my own weaknesses in terms of that kind of stuff. You get me thinking about logistics networks. Where do the roads go? Where do I put train lines? Where do I put shipping lanes and stuff like that? What resources are produced where and where do they get sent to? I'm a huge sucker for that. In some of my fantasy world building projects, one of the first things I look at is, okay, here's the different nations I've put onto the map. What does each one produce? What stuff gets made there? Like, are we hunting monsters over here and we sell monster parts? Is there some magic material here that gets exported? That kind of stuff is very interesting to me. Perhaps a little bit unsurprising considering that I play grand strategy games a whole bunch, and even though I have my concerns about EU5 in terms of how difficult they're trying to make rapid expansion, I am kind of excited for the trade stuff, the way that they do control instead of autonomy in provinces now and stuff like that. Oh, that looks interesting. That looks like I'm going to have a lot of fun with it. I'm very much looking forward to it. So yeah, here, like, okay, they've got access to the river and sea for shipping, and I immediately want to start writing about where the train lines go and stuff like that, but we'll hold off on that. So it stretches like not quite to the river for most of it, but then to the north it starts to touch on the river where the docks are, and maybe another docking area around the actual coast. So you get like some shipping that comes into the bay, and then really big ships that dock out away to the north. I'm imagining that since across the west of the rivers has hilly areas and raised land where the old city is, there'll be cliffs. There'll be cliffs there where you can't really get down to the water, but off to the east it's all much lower down, it's low and flat. With easy access to the shore, you can probably dock very, very large ships there. Okay, what else is important about the industrial quarter? In terms of its layout and stuff, nothing. It would be interesting to look at what the factories are actually for, what gets produced here, but it's not super necessary. From a magical standpoint, there's not a huge amount to say here. It's got some of the advantages of the abandoned district, but yeah. I might make some cults that are, like, instead of nature cults, they have the opposite. Maybe some pollution monster similar to Exor from Ferngully. That's a good movie. Haven't seen it in a long, long time, but I do occasionally go and rewatch the Toxic Love song. Very, very good. Yeah, I don't think the industrial quarter needs much more detail than this, really. The abandoned district. So, hopping back over again for a second. Click away. But I feel like the only quick way I can set this up is with hotkeys, which kind of don't work when it's just these specific windows that I happen to need for this specific stream. Yeah, so the abandoned area here, this was the most important part of the city, of the most important area around here for a long time, because this is where the bridges were. This is the Twin Crossing. And this is where the farmland was often here, this sort of area, maybe a bit down here, I'm not sure, but mostly over here. Then cross over rivers, road along here, logging camps. Then eventually people started going, well, hang on, look at all, like, up to here, they first started building in this little crook here. There'll be some fort kind of stuff here. Because if this is cliffs and this is hills, then this will be where it's lowest. So here's where they started building, got some docks down. Maybe they tried to sell things upriver and then put them over and then sell them upriver here to get out east. That would make a lot of sense. And then you can sail the food back downriver, cross, and downriver. Very convenient. But then as they cleared more and more land, someone would have been like, hey, why don't we just build here, farm like here, and make this where we actually live? And then that's where Trin's Cross would have started growing into a city here. They built another bridge there, expanded up into this area, and then as it grew, it modernized. We started building in grids instead of wavy roads, expanded all into this area, started building industry over here in all this already cleared flat land, because we didn't need the farmland here anymore, because modern agriculture meant farmland here was sufficient, and then that's how the city grows. So what happened right here? This will... like, people will have always passed through here, but basically all they did was pass through here. There will have been buildings here, and maybe that's why it ended up abandoned. That's why it could be justified that this became the abandoned area, because people tried to build here, take advantage of all the through traffic shipping between these areas. But once the focus shifted over here, and then again, once the modern day introduced like more bridges along the rivers, this got entirely circumvented, fell into disrepair. All of the new development money was going into this area, and this just got left behind. It's not even that there was an economic downturn for the city's booming. It just wasn't booming in this direction, people just left. Not abandoned as in it failed, but abandoned as in no longer useful or relevant. Take another sip of my drink. Originally a series of inns and merchant houses along the shipping route between the east and west, the now abandoned district tried to grow into a town of its own in its own right before the development of Trin's Cross. However, with the move of agriculture to the west and later back east, and the city at the modern era, the burgeoning town was bypassed. Time. While it still benefited from the early stage of process growth. Typing. Process growth. One's truly rapid development that's in, and the city broad across the river banks. No one saw any reason to invest in this area. Now it's only relevant is the road that still over the wind crossings. For the magically climb, however, the abandoned is extremely valuable as a place to set up this and work interrupted. As such, active steps are taken to keep the area largely inhabited and interesting to the public. There we go. Use of international house ownership between you. Whereas the now abandoned district tried to grow the town in its own right before the development of transport. However, with the move of agriculture to the west and late east as the city entered an era, the burgeoning town was bypassed. While it still benefited from the early stage of Twins Cross's growth, once truly rapid development set in the city and the city sprawled across the riverbanks, no one saw any reason to invest in this area. Now its only relevance is the road that still passes through it in crossings. For the magically inclined, however, the abandoned district is extremely valuable as a place to set up bases and work uninterrupted. As such, active steps are taken to keep the area largely uninhabited and uninteresting to the public. Independent practitioners tend to remain in the active of city, and the only ones who isolate themselves here are the truly dedicated and truly dedicated, and those with the means not care that they live out of a society convenient, not even slightly how that's spelled, conveniences. Most of those who set up up here then are small constant groups that need a shared space to craft in or trying to avoid the attention of any of the larger players in the city. There we go. So obviously the West Bay and East Bay Club have all sorts of places. They've got like bespoke, custom-built underground bunkers and cellars attached to various mansions and establishments where they do all of their nonsense, because they've got the money and resources for that kind of stuff, and they've been around a long, long time. The University Library Committee uses the university. They've got plenty of space there, or they go out on field trips when they need to. Harrison and Phillips have a legal office somewhere. Full Force the Demon Worshippers. Those would be the kind of people who are setting up off in the abandoned district, maybe right at the edges so that they can go cause trouble in the rest of the city. You know, like right at the limits of the abandoned district, where there's still technically a bus stop so you can get a ride into town, but also you're in a neighborhood that nobody really wants to go to. Gonna take a sip. That kind of thing, like out of the way but not completely disconnected. The Circle community, they are in the old city and they've got enough members that they don't, like they're established enough that they don't care about avoiding others. But like smaller versions of that, small circles of witches, small cults to various entities that just don't have the pull to get their preferred locations, or that maybe don't care about a preferred location, right? Like if you're a cult worshipping some kind of nature, spirit, deity thing off in the woods, then you kind of have to have access to the wood. It's not going to work otherwise. Or if your patron is some flame beast in a furnace, then you'll be off in the industrial quarter and you'll have an actual furnace that serves as the shrine to your god. But if you've got none of that, if you're just drawing magic circles on the floor and communing with some eldritch creature, then you do it in the abandoned district. You make a nice haunted house somewhere or something like that. That's the kind of thing that goes on here. And of course all the individuals. There will be some who live in the rest of the city and just need a secondary space where they can do proper magic without having that nonsense in their home and having enough room and being uninterrupted, and they will make the commute to get out here. But I think it will be less than the amount of people who go here to actually live here, and those will be, on average, either more desperate practitioners or more powerful practitioners. Because they're living in an area where you have to walk like 45 minutes an hour to get to somewhere that's actually inhabited, and maybe walk a bit further before you finally get to somewhere that has shops and stuff like that. The water and electricity probably aren't connected in like half of the abandoned district, half of it's been shut off and taken off the grid. Buses don't have routes going through here because why would they? No one lives there. That's the kind of area we're talking about. So you are kind of cut off from society unless you've got some kind of job that you can do. Like, unless you've got some income coming in that you can set up deliveries to your house. But then even for deliveries, that means people are coming along, they're interrupting you, they're making connections to your house and connecting you to your house, which means your magic gets more complicated. It's not ideal. I think probably most of them aren't going to want that. So yeah, on average, the people who are here are either desperate and they had to go out here, or they are powerful and they don't particularly care about being connected to the rest of the city. Or they're insane, you know. I think being driven mad with eldritch power and going to live as a strange hermit in an abandoned house is definitely in the cards for this kind of setting. I haven't really made a decision on how... Excuse me. Sorry. I haven't really made a decision on how light or dark this setting is supposed to be yet. But I'm thinking we're leaning towards light. It might be one of those kind of settings, and there's a few of these, various, stuff I've read on Royal Road and stuff like that has a similar vibe of light-hearted goriness. Kind of like the average D&D game, the average tabletop RPG game, whereas, like, technically speaking, the events happening in this story are pretty damn bloody and dark and grim, but also we're playing a game and having memes and stuff, so our characters are, by proxy of us having a good time, also having a good time. And that's maybe the kind of vibe I'm going for here. It's not super serious, it's not dark in tone, but it certainly includes lots of dark subject matter and lots of very violent and gory stuff, but almost played for laughs. And I know that there are works of fiction I could point at and go, yeah, like this kind of thing, but for the life of me, nothing's popping into my head right now. I cannot think of a single example of a kind of thing. Oh, Murder Drones, actually. The web series on YouTube. Web series? Web series sounds like web serial, which refers to a written work, but this is an animation. Very good, go watch it, it's free on YouTube. But yeah, Murder Drones is very much like, hey, we've got a spire of robot corpses reaching up into the sky, but also this is very much a comedy show, so maybe don't think too hard about that. And I think it manages to hit that tone really well. This is probably not that comedic of a world, but the idea of excuse me. The idea of the bloody and gory and dark right next to the light-hearted is present here as well. Which means Eldritch Madness is on the table, but it's not that bad. You can probably come back for it. It's not like you touch magic ever and you're doomed. You can certainly practice magic and be perfectly fine. You just gotta be sensible, If you do something very stupid, then there are consequences. Okay, the new city, the old city. Excuse me. What do we even say about these? Right, the old city, yeah, the initial part of Trinscross. I've explained why this was built first like 4 times this stream already, so I don't think I need to do it again and put it into writing. Is there anything else notable about it? I mean, we could have some notes. The west bank of the Rhone is hilly. Cliffs to the north into the sea. That kind of stuff. Papers of woods to the west. I suppose I should probably also have the woods. Don't know what I'm gonna call those yet either. God, the noise. Thankfully it seems the noise gate on the microphone is working and that didn't get picked up. But yeah, new house is on a slightly busier street than the old one was, and for the most part it's fine. It does mean that every once in a while someone comes tearing past on their motorbike at full volume, which is very annoying. But yeah, the woods are going to need an actual name at some point. The something forest. Let's see, can I pull up fantasy? And search for forest names? Forest names, jungle name. Make that visible. The Vicious Wilds, the Ocelot Jungle, the Blazing Wilds, the Greedy Wilds. No, these are terrible. The Feared Rainforest, the Baboon Jungle, the Summoning Rush. No, this is exactly the issue though, isn't it? Because how do you make a natural feature name generator, right? You basically can't. I remember when I looked for river names as well. You know, Turtle Creek, Serpent Brook, Mirror Stream, it's all the feature it is, and then like a word stuck on the front, which is not an unreasonable way to name something like this, and as far as having a name generator is concerned, it's almost the only way to name something like this, because what else are you gonna do, right? Like, unless you decide on a name in, like, if you want it to be realistic, unless you make up a conlang and take that language's word for river and then modernize it a bit into your modern day conlang, there's no other options, no good way to do this. Fancy redwood woods, threatening birch woods, young forest. Yeah. Probably something descriptive like the Black Forest in Germany or the New Forest in the UK. Something very simple like that would work for here as well. Possibly something that I can tie into the other names, like if we called, maybe they kept a theme going between the thread and the yarn. Ugh, I do not know why I'm suddenly yawning so much out of nowhere. Yeah, maybe they kept a theme going. It won't have been a separate forest from everything else at the time. Maybe instead of a black forest, because it's right by the sea and the rivers, the blue forest for the water. That's not terrible. The blue forest. Up on the hills being up higher towards the sky. High forest, blue forest. The blue forest is not bad. Really, really not bad, actually, thinking about it. Named after the blue of the rivers, the sea, and the sky when looking up at the hills to the west from down by the rivers. Yeah, that actually sounds pretty good in context, doesn't it? Okay. So, the Blue Forest. And yeah, the old city tapers off into the woods to the west. The woods now have a name. Anything else notable to say here, really? Which of the clubs is over here? Will be the West Bay Club, won't it? Heavy-handed in politics and influence of the city. The West Bay Club will be somewhere in the city. Then the new city. While Prince Us grew over the centuries to other large tracts of the western bank of Yeah, did I get this right earlier? West bank of the Yarn. Right, the Fredesty is the river to the east. The Yarn is the river to the west. While transfers grew over the centuries to cover large tracts of the western bank of the Yarn, and then along the coast on the land between the rivers, most of the city was built in the period of extremely rapid growth over the last few decades. The new city built in that time is a serious departure from the old. Built on a grid instead of winding roads from before it. Each has it consists of how to phrase this, built on a grid instead of winding roads from before. It forms an impressive skyline of skyscraper and apartment blocks. There you go. Most of the remaining, my god, I'm getting worse and worse at writing. Remaining land between the rivers and to the south be taken up by block of buildings. Yeah, well, transfers grew over the centuries to cover large tracts of the western bank of the Yarn, and then along the coast on the land between the rivers. Most of the city was built in a period of extremely rapid growth over the last decades. The new city built in that time is a serious departure from the old. Built on a grid instead of the winding roads from before, it forms an impressive skyline of skyscrapers and apartment blocks. The remaining land between the rivers and to the south has been taken up by block after buildings. That takes up most of that land, possibly some slightly to the southwest as well, depending on how far down the old city dipped. Not certain on that yet. Possibly a little bit eastwards into the industrial area as well. Not southeast, because that's the bit that got abandoned. Maybe there's a skyscraper or two, as an apartment block or two. Let's add that into here. A few doomed attempts were made to revitalize the area, and there Field has left behind the shells of a handful of never used blocks. Really big ones, like massive, ugly concrete shell cubes that no one ever actually moved into because they looked terrible and there was nothing around them to entice people into that area. Anything else about the new city? Where would the university go? Prince Cross has a university and it's relevant to the magical side of things since the University Library Committee is a magical research group. Is that in the old city or the new city? The old city must have had educational places. Maybe part of the creation of the new city, part of the boom to expansion was that some teaching institute got upgraded and expanded to make a really fancy university, and that was part of the schism for the Twin Bay Club and part of the impetus for the rapid growth. Some of the how to phrase this, the most developed, the most interesting, some of the nicest, the most interesting. Some of the most major features of the new city lie in the northwest towards Old City, as they were built early. When the expansion process was just beginning. The further east you go, the more industrial things get, and the further south, the more urban. The unfortunate mixing of these further contributed to the undesirability of the abandoned district. And so the growing new city never properly connected with it. There we go. These features include the Queen's Cross University, and what else would I have put up there? I know I plonked a stadium onto the map while we were building that, but that was mostly just for scale. I don't know if I would actually put a sports stadium into this city. Yeah, these features include the Prince Cross University, several museums, research, the Prince Cross University, and lab and research centers, several museums, what kind of stuff do people build when they've got a bunch of money, the city's expanding, they want to build stuff to show how wealthy and developed they are. So they build a place of learning, they build a place of history, they build a park maybe, but that's not really a feature. Maybe the Children's University and Research Center, several museums, parks, and what's one other big feature that we can put up? Museums, parks, and the new government building, the new town hall, museums, and the new city hall. Considering I talked a fair bit in the initial stream about the importance of certain buildings and a city hall or a place of governance being one of those where it's like rarely ever important to a story and not often something that needs detail or for you to even label or anything, but if you look on a map and it's missing, it will stand out in its absence. So I should definitely include a thought about it here. Yeah, so that's the new city. Got this, got that, got this. Really don't need to put anything into here because all kind of covered elsewhere. We've got the Blue Forest, Twins Cross as a whole. Okay. We take another sip of my. With all of that in mind, what else is of immediate relevance? Obviously, there's a ton of stuff to do in terms of coming up with more organizations, then coming up with key members for some of those organizations, a handful of independent practitioners to go into the city, and then specific buildings and stuff. So there's going to be what's it called? Like home bases for various organizations. For example, we'll talk about the community center that the Circle of Community runs its meetings out of. We'll go into great detail on the university library and what kind of stuff is in there, and the various subgroups of the library committee. The East and West Bay Club are going to have clubhouses and businesses. One of them, I think the West Bay Club, is going to have control of a bank and stuff like that. Maybe there'll be rival banks even. East Twins Cross and West Twins Cross Bank. Nah, the clubs wouldn't play into that, so they'd come up with a different name. Yeah, something combative maybe. Who of them will have named it first? Probably the old money types. The West Bay Club hung on to the existing institutions, so they'll have the original, which might just be called the Twins Cross Bank, and then the East Bay Club needed something else to compete, so what do they call theirs? The new Twins Cross Bank? No, that's not really improvement, like Twins Cross 2.0. It would have to be something very grand sounding, something very self-aggrandizing, something that manages to say that they think that they're better without distancing themselves from the city as a whole. The New Era Bank? The Future Bank? New Providence? I don't know. Something like that. I can workshop it later. But yeah, so that kind of stuff all will be for future streams. That's all interesting stuff that we can still work on and add onto this project. But what else besides so that's going in that kind of feels like we're going into the next stage of things, right? That's going into the nitty-gritty of the world building process. While we're still fairly large scale, talking about the whole regions of the city, potentially I could start making a few neighborhoods for different places in the city. That would be an option. I don't necessarily know what I might write about each neighborhood without going into detail on the magical aspects. It would be a way to start putting specific features into specific areas of the city. So for example, if there's a neighborhood in the old city and that's where the original bank building is, there's another neighborhood which happens to be where the old city hall is, or the town hall even from before, when they built the new one. There might be a point of contention whether the new city hall is in the new city or the old city. That's probably going to be a big focus of the conflict. And I know I'm really putting a lot into the Twin Bay Club, but it's just kind of because they've got so much inherent story going into them anyway. But it might be a big part of the contention between them that the West Bay Club has all of the old deep roots that managed to hang on to what still works off of their original systems, whereas the East Bay Club has that kind of modern legitimacy because the Twin Bay Club was trying to expand. It wanted to move its power base into the new city, and now they're clinging to the old and to tradition, while the new town hall, all the new fancy buildings, the business and industry and administrative centers are in the new city, where potentially the East Bay Club have managed to acquire more influence. But how much of it can they hold on to? Maybe it's a situation of they hold these things in theory, but a lot of the individual people involved answer to someone else in practice. That kind of thing. Do love me some good intrigue and stuff like that. I've seen people talking recently with the Death Diaries for the CK3 China expansion about how it's very focused on the Chinese government and the administrative stuff, which makes sense for Crusader Kings 3 and for the kind of nature of the game about dynasties and owning land and grabbing power and stuff like that. But there were a lot of people saying like, damn, if you watch Chinese media about that era, very little of it is about kings and administrators and stuff like that. It's all about inner palace court drama between the concubines and stuff like that. Who's rising to power where, who's trying to poison who, it's all stuff like that. And I must admit, I've read a few web serials, web novels and stuff like that with that exact theme and premise. I've watched a few animes about that as well, because it's fascinating. I really enjoy this kind of drama kind of thing, which is weird because there's a bunch of like crime shows about various criminal dynasties, and I think a few business ones as well, but I never enjoy watching those. And I think it's because they, to make an interesting story, focus on the interpersonal drama side of things, which simply doesn't interest me as much as the big picture playmaking side of things, and the logistical practical side of things. I've always kind of bounced off of those shows, which is unfortunate because I do think I would enjoy the rest of what's in there, but it's just in a packaging that doesn't appeal to me, unfortunately. Yeah. Having gotten completely sidetracked, to come back to the original question of what other big picture stuff is there that we could do now, and I think this is largely it. There's stuff I think probably the next big picture stuff that I can maybe look at is doing another stream of Incarnate and doing some map drawing, putting a few major roads down, placing down the university and a few of the labs, to Town Hall, figuring out some details of where various things like that go. Might also do some streams building out specific neighborhoods again, and specific clusters of buildings and who controls what, where, and stuff like that. But again, that's nitty-gritty stuff of fleshing out each of these organizations and stuff like that. So probably for later. Now, I think in broad strokes, we have established what the city is about. We've established the major organizations. We've established how it developed without getting bogged down in really, really deep detail. Because you can go completely wild with this kind of stuff. Like, you can talk about major events that happened historically, major decisions, who was mayor when and what policies and stuff they had. But I think just a very broad overview of, yeah, the city kind of started here, it grew like this is why this side is this and that side is that, and done. And just like that, we've got the layout sorted. I think this is the more convenient approach for this kind of thing at the very least. Might be a bit different if I was writing this for a book, if this were all the background lore document for a story I wanted to write, or for a tabletop RPG to run, then different details would be a lot more important. I do think I might write a couple short stories, like little snippet style things, set in this city, just to flesh out some of the theming of it. Potentially the next bit that's actually very important to move towards now might be some of the magic. Broadly. So let's summarize some of what we've got for this so far. The actual practice of magic is extremely varied. There are many ways to draw fire into the world, though you are actually practical in most cases. Many of the useful ones rely on drawing from powerful creatures outside reality, and what powers are available, therefore highly dependent on the creature being petitioned. The main thing keeping magic in check and limited is mandate. This entity has, at some point in history, won control of reality and decided it wants fixed work a certain way. The result of this is that the more noticeable how do you... Oh, hello? What did I write before? Did I not write this? I could have sworn I did. The more noticeable a magical effect is, the harder it is to action. Pause, as the mandate will prevent from working. Yeah. It doesn't care about worship and doesn't hand out power since it doesn't want there to be magic. When it actually decides to act in the world, beyond tracking down spells, it sends an agent edicts. These are most flashed up. Has succeeded in escaping the mandate. Possible. It will prevent it working. In some case where the casting of a spell escapes the mandate's notice, but the effects are still obvious, it will send an edict to hunt down on the ball. There we go. The one thing all forms of magic have in common is that they are affected by connections. The more a chain to the more living beings, especially people, that change to something would be noticed by, the more connections it has. No, hang on, that's, I've misremembered that. The more people will be noticed by, the more the mandate would see it. Right. The more living beings, the more, especially people that change to something would be noticed by, the easier it is for the mandate to notice. This is why I'm writing this stuff down now before we get any bigger here, so that I don't start tripping over myself in the future. Because it wasn't a very complicated system so far, but as I start to hammer more details out, it becomes increasingly important that I actually keep track of what the details are and don't contradict myself. Yeah, each hand and image responsible, the more living beings, especially people that change to something with noticed by, the easier it is to know. The one thing all forms of magic have in common is that they're impacted by connections. The more connected something is, the harder it is to affect in the first place, even without the mandate interference. But to act on something requires some connection to serve as a medium. The type of connection required depends on the type of magic being used and the ended result. Alright, anything else that's relevant here for the broad strokes kind of thing. Anyways, to draw power into the world. You actually practice with cases. Have another note. An average age. Just as a kind of reference. No, let's say mid-level. An average mid-level mage. A mage of basic competence is able to cause a number of more acts casually and a few larger ones with minimal setup. The core of their tends to pretty reliable. Hello. How's it going? Pretty well. Doing a little bit of urban fantasy world building. Nice obsidian setup. Yes, it's lovely. Very, very useful project. Am I writing a book? No, not at the moment. This is just kind of a little thought experiment world building project that I'm doing specifically on Twitch streams, just for the fun of it. I felt in a mood to try and build a city, something I enjoy doing in general, and I figured, I'll go for urban fantasy specifically. Trying to improve my English. Nice, that's always good. Learning more languages is a very, very valuable skill. And hello, Soizeko as well, or hola. The core of their magic has to be pretty reliable. Yeah, I don't want magic to be overly difficult. I do want it to carry risks if you're doing something fancy. They would be able to use some limited telekinesis in private without effort. Move a large object with a small ritual, or bring down a building with great effort and some risk. So it's strong stuff. Like, these mages are able to do some things, but they're inherently limited by the way that all this works, both with connections and with the oversight of a mandate, which will mean that, for example, somebody could, like a reasonable, not overly powerful, just average mage, could in theory set up some big ritual outside of a building and have the whole thing over with magic. In practice, first of all, they're not going to get away with that because the mandate is going to cause the spell to fail to begin with, unless the building is isolated and hidden away. And secondly, it would be useless, because the only way to affect the building easily is for it to have no connections to others that would make the magic more difficult, only connections to the person who's trying to do the thing. So unless you're trying to use some spell to renovate your house and you want to knock a door down with magic instead of doing it with a sledgehammer, you can't actually pull it off, because if you try to do it on someone else's house, it gets exponentially harder. If you try to do it on a public location, it's impossible because the mandate stops you. That's the kind of balance I want to strike. I want these mages to be powerful in the specific situations that their power is applicable to, and limited outside of it. I don't want them to be running around ruining reality without any consequences, but I do want them to be able to punch hard when it comes up. And I think this is the right balance and the right approach to achieving that. I think also, given that we've talked a lot about connections and stuff, and mages potentially going to abandoned areas to set up where their magic is stronger, there has to be some amount of consideration for a sort of mage tower, mage lair kind of setup, right? So a mid-level practitioner is going to have, they'll have some location that serves as a center to their power. This place is deliberately isolated. My spelling gets worse and worse when I try to type and talk at the same time. This place is deliberately isolated to remove outside influences. It may also be partially cut off from reality. Doing this wrong and ending up branded out in the void is one of the barriers when being more high-level mages. Since so much of this magic system is going to be focused around mages petitioning various powers outside of reality, or petitioning various more powerful beings for magic, and the presence of a mandate limiting magic, meaning these beings can't be in the world, they have to be elsewhere. So much focus on other worlds and other realities and stuff means that I kind of have to, just for good sense and completeness, include a lot of other realms in the world building to some extent. And I think I want to take advantage of that by having it be a fairly major feature in how magic works more broadly. So there's going to be a lot of like hidden pocket spaces and expeditions to other realms, and I think that will probably be one of the big things that draws people into various organizations, because it's not difficult, I think, for the average person to go, hey, maybe it's not entirely sensible to worship some eldritch creature and draw power from it in return for offerings or whatever. So maybe I just try and do the stuff by myself. But then comes the risk. If you want to do the stuff by yourself, you have to set up somewhere outside of view of the mandate to draw your power from, and you have to go beyond reality to find resources, to find materials and spell components and stuff like that. And that's going to present a really serious risk. So do you take that risk, or do you take the risk of working for some creature that isn't human and may not have your best interests at heart? That's kind of a trade-off. I think, I know that it's the prevailing thought at the moment that restrictions are more interesting than powers, you know, coming from Brandon Sanderson and his laws of magic, that drawbacks and costs are what really make a magic system or make it interesting and such. And I think that there's a truth to that within reason, but I personally really do enjoy very powerful magic. And what I think is more interesting, perhaps, is trade-offs As in, like, you absolutely can do a thing, it just has to be done a certain way, and if you don't want to do it, here's a different way that has other drawbacks. I don't like when there's pure drawback of you have to pay this price if you want to do the thing at all. In a system that's a bit more malleable in the type of price you have to pay, there is potential for someone to get everything they want without having to give up very much at all. But they have to be clever about it, they have to research, they have to find out these options exist in the first place and how to access them, and I think that is a little bit more interesting. That's the kind of thing I want to do here. There's a lot of thought that still needs to go into the exact details of the magic and what exactly, because when you start looking into dimensional pocket spaces and stuff, it can get very awkward and nitty-gritty very quickly, so that's probably something I'll want to do off-stream when I can focus on it fully. Same thing as getting some of the basics down on a few influential figures and where a few different things in the city are. So I'll do those probably at some point off-stream, and then come back to this at a later date. The next stream might be more Terraria. I don't think I'll come back to this immediately. It might be doing a little bit of creative writing, maybe do some short snippets set in this world. I'm not quite sure yet. For the time being, however, we've crossed the 2-hour mark, and I think this will do for a nice little weekend stream. So for now, let me say thank you very much for joining me here today. It was quite nice to get back to streaming and to do a little relaxing bit of writing on a Saturday, and I will see you again next time.